Imagine ruling an empire so rich that gold and silver poured from the earth, yet you go bankrupt not once, not twice, but 9 times. How does the richest kingdom in history collapse from wealth itself? The answer hides in secrets of debt, mutiny, and a treasure that betrayed its own empire. In the next moments, you'll uncover the shocking truth behind Spain's rise and fall. But what they did to survive may shock you more than their defeat. We'll explain everything in this video step by step. Don't skip it. The mountain rose from the Andes like a promise carved from the earth itself. Potosi, a place so rich it shimmered even before a single coin was struck. Men spoke of it in whispers, as if saying its name too loudly might wake something dangerous beneath the stone. When the first veins of silver were cut open, it felt like a miracle, not earned, discovered, as if God himself had tilted the world and let wealth spill into Spanish hands. Far below the summit, men descended into darkness. Some volunteered, many did not. They carried crude tools and fragile hopes. The air grew thin. The dust clung to their lungs. Each breath shortened a life. Hands bled against sharp rock. Backs bent. Names were forgotten. But the silver kept coming, hauled upward in sacks, glowing faintly in torchlight, as if it knew its destination was far away. Across the ocean, the king never saw the mountain. He saw numbers, columns of figures written in ink, tallies that grew larger with every fleet that crossed the Atlantic. The treasure did not arrive quietly. Bells rang in Seville, crowds gathered, chests were pried open, silver coins poured onto tables in a sound like rain. Clerks worked until their fingers cramped, racing to count what felt infinite. Spain felt invincible. How could a kingdom that owned a mountain of silver ever fear scarcity? Why save when more was always on the way? Why hesitate when the earth itself seemed to obey? War answered those questions slowly. Then all at once. Armies demanded pay. Not tomorrow, now. Ships demanded timber, rope, iron, and men who would not sail for promises. Fortresses demanded stone. Cannon demanded bronze. Each decision was urgent, each expense justified, each payment made with silver that had not yet arrived. Behind closed doors, candlelight flickered across anxious faces. Bankers leaned forward, contracts were signed. Future treasure was pledged like collateral on a gamble that could not be paused. The silver became a ghost before it was ever mined, already spoken for, already spent, already gone. On the streets, life grew heavier. Bread cost more, cloth cost more, wages stayed the same. A shoemaker stared at his empty shop while foreign goods filled the markets. Why buy local when silver made imports cheaper? Workshops went quiet. Skills faded. Pride eroded. The sound of hammers disappeared, replaced by the clink of coins that passed through hands too quickly to stay. In distant villages, families waited. A son watched his father leave with an army that promised pay and honor. Weeks passed, then months. Letters stopped. Rumors arrived instead. Unpaid soldiers. Empty purses. Hunger marching alongside banners. Mothers stretched thin loaves across too many mouths. Taxes rose. Questions were swallowed. The mountain kept giving. That was the cruelest part. Every time the crown reached for silver, there was more. Enough to delay collapse, enough to borrow again, enough to pretend the numbers still worked. Abundance became anesthesia, pain dulled, warnings ignored. But silver does not multiply itself. It does not plant fields. It does not teach apprentices. It does not wait patiently in workshops to become something greater. It moves, it flows, it leaves. The king sat surrounded by wealth that could not stay still, richer than any man in history, yet trapped inside obligations that grew faster than treasure ships could sail. Each decision narrowed the future. Each loan tightened the knot. Each payment solved today by stealing from tomorrow. In Potosi, another shift began. Men disappeared into tunnels that stretched deeper than before. The mountain groaned under its own wounds. Somewhere between the depths of the mine and the silence of the royal chambers, the truth took shape. Quiet, unforgiving. A kingdom drowning not in poverty, but in silver that could never be held long enough to save it. At first, no one understands what is happening. The coins look the same. They feel the same in the hand. Silver still shines. But something invisible has shifted. A loaf of bread that once cost a single coin now costs 2, then 3. The baker apologizes, eyes lowered, as if guilt might soften hunger. Customers argue, then they pay, because they must. Markets grow louder, not richer, louder with frustration, louder with fear. Voices rise as purses grow lighter. A carpenter counts his wages twice, convinced he has been cheated, yet the numbers are correct. He earns what he always earned. It just no longer buys what it used to. Silver floods Europe like a silent tide. It arrives in ports, moves through counting houses, spills into cities and villages far from the sea. Too much of it, too quickly. Prices climb not in leaps, but in steps so steady they feel normal. Until they don't. Until families realize they are running in place while the ground beneath them tilts upward. In Spain, the pain cuts deeper. Money pours in, yet life grows harder. A paradox no one knows how to name. Workers demand higher pay. Employers refuse. Foreign goods crowd the stalls, cheaper, shinier, plentiful. Spanish workshops fall behind. Why struggle to make cloth when silver buys it faster from elsewhere? Why invest time when money arrives without effort? Fires go cold in forges, tools rest unused, skills fade quietly, passed over by a generation that learns to trade, not to build. The economy shifts, not with intention, but with temptation. Silver becomes easier than sweat. In the countryside, farmers feel it differently. Taxes rise, rent rises, grain prices swing wildly with every rumor of a delayed fleet. One bad harvest, one late shipment, and entire villages feel the shock. Mothers stretch meals thinner. Fathers leave to find work that no longer exists. Hunger does not arrive dramatically. It seeps in. The king hears complaints filtered through layers of officials, inflation, shortages, discontent. But the treasury is full, or appears to be. There is always another ship expected, another delivery promised, another solution that requires only more silver. The problem feels temporary. The pain feels distant. In the streets, it feels permanent. A widow sells a family heirloom for half its former worth. A soldier sends money home that no longer covers rent. A merchant watches profits vanish as costs outrun prices overnight. Everyone feels poor, yet surrounded by money. It makes no sense. That is what terrifies them most. Inflation does not announce itself. It erodes. It teaches people that tomorrow will cost more than today and savings are a mistake. Spend now, hoard goods, trust nothing. The social fabric tightens, then begins to tear. Arguments break out over bread, over wages, over blame. Foreigners are accused, merchants are cursed, officials shrug. The silver keeps moving, faster now, slipping through fingers, across borders, into wars fought far away. Spain imports what it once made, pays others to grow what once grew at home. The empire feeds itself with money instead of roots, and money does not grow back. In counting rooms, bankers adjust rates, interest creeps upward, risk is priced in. The future becomes more expensive with every transaction. What began as abundance now behaves like scarcity, disguised in shine. At night, candles burn longer as families calculate what they can no longer afford. Children listen from doorways. They learn early that numbers can hurt, that coins lie, that having more money does not mean being safer. Silver continues to arrive, prices continue to rise, and somewhere between the clink of coins and the empty cupboards, an entire society realizes it is trapped inside a storm it cannot see, carried forward by wealth that is quietly undoing everything it touches. War never arrives alone. It brings ledgers, contracts, and quiet men, counting costs by candlelight. Spain's wars stretched across maps few could imagine, fought on fields the king would never see. Italy, the Low Countries, the Atlantic. Each front demanded men, ships, food, powder, and time. And time was the most expensive thing of all. Orders left the palace sealed with wax. Armies moved because they had to. Soldiers marched with worn boots and borrowed hope. Many were not Spaniards, mercenaries from distant lands, loyal only to pay promised, not yet delivered. Every step forward added another line to a debt no one wanted to read aloud. On the battlefield, victory was measured in blood. Off it, in silver. A campaign did not end when the fighting stopped. It ended when the bills were paid. And they never stopped coming. Horses died. They had to be replaced. Ships rotted. They had to be rebuilt. Men deserted. They had to be bribed back or replaced with others just as desperate. In foreign cities, soldiers waited for wages that arrived late or not at all. Hunger eroded discipline faster than any enemy. Fires burned low in camps. Armor was sold piece by piece to buy bread. Commanders wrote letters upward, pleading, explaining, apologizing. The replies came slowly, when they came at all. At home, the war was quieter. No cannon, no banners, just numbers. Taxes rose again and again. Farmers handed over grain meant for winter. Artisans paid fees for wars they did not understand, fought in places they would never visit. The empire felt vast. The burden felt personal. Each year the king faced the same choice: withdraw and appear weak, or continue and spend what did not yet exist. Retreat risked rebellion. Victory promised stability, at least on paper. The decision was always the same: continue, borrow, hope. Silver ships were tracked like lifelines. Delays caused panic. Storms became national threats. A single wreck could mean unpaid armies, broken alliances, cities on the brink of revolt. The fate of thousands rested on weather far from shore. In the Low Countries, unpaid soldiers muttered among themselves. Anger simmered. Hunger sharpened it. When restraint finally broke, it was brutal. Cities that were meant to be protected were stripped bare, not out of hatred, but survival. Civilians learned that the difference between friend and enemy could disappear when wages did. The cost of war did not end with battles. Widows appeared quietly. Orphans multiplied. Fields lay untended. Entire regions hollowed out by absence. Young men left and did not return, not because they fell in battle, but because the war never truly ended for them. Behind closed doors, officials traded urgency for dignity. They negotiated loans at harsher terms. Interest climbed. Credit tightened. The price of fighting tomorrow rose because of yesterday's decisions. The empire moved forward, chained to its past. Maps on palace walls still showed power. Reality did not. The war machine consumed silver with mechanical indifference. No amount was ever enough. Every victory created new obligations. Every defense required more offense. The empire expanded, and with it, the cost of holding everything together. The king prayed for peace while preparing for the next campaign. Advisors spoke of honor, faith, destiny. None of them spoke of rest. The war had become a living thing, feeding on momentum, impossible to stop without collapse. And somewhere between distant battlefields and silent tax rolls, Spain learned that global power demanded global sacrifice, and that an empire fighting everywhere was never truly fighting for tomorrow, only struggling to survive the cost of today. The agreements were never signed in public. No bells rang, no crowds gathered, only quiet rooms, heavy doors, and men who understood that power often moved in silence. Ink touched parchment while candles burned low, and the future was traded before it arrived. The bankers came from Genoa, calm, precise. They did not wear armor, they wore patience. They spoke in measured tones, asking questions that sounded polite but cut deeply. How much silver would arrive next year? How many ships were expected? How certain the routes were? Storms were mentioned only briefly. War was assumed. The crown needed money now. Soldiers were waiting. Ships were half built. Allies demanded reassurance. The bankers offered solutions wrapped in courtesy. Loans against future treasure. Advances secured by fleets not yet sailed. Promises anchored to mountains thousands of miles away. It felt reasonable. It always did at first. Silver that did not yet exist was assigned a value. Interest was added quietly, like a shadow lengthening at dusk. The king signed because there was no alternative that did not look like surrender. Honor demanded action. Faith demanded resolve. The numbers were trusted to take care of themselves. In counting houses, clerks recalculated futures with every signature. Risk was priced. Contingencies imagined. If one fleet failed, another would follow. If one war dragged on, silver would cover it. On paper, it worked. On paper, it always did. Time passed. Expenses grew. New loans replaced old ones. Interest stacked upon interest, compounding like a force of nature. What had begun as assistance slowly became dependence. The crown no longer waited for silver to arrive. It spent it before it was born. Across the ocean, miners descended deeper into Potosi. The mountain groaned under the weight of expectation. More silver was demanded, faster. Lives shortened to keep schedules intact. The metal carried not just value, but urgency. At court, the weight of debt pressed invisibly. Officials avoided speaking the total aloud. To name it was to acknowledge its scale. Instead, they focused on immediate needs. Pay this regiment. Outfit that fleet. Quiet this rebellion. Delay reckoning one more season. The bankers watched closely. Their confidence never wavered. They had clauses, guarantees, priority claims on arriving treasure. Even in default, they would be paid first. The empire carried the risk. The lenders collected certainty. When ships arrived late, anxiety spread through palaces and camps alike. When storms scattered fleets, negotiations grew colder. Terms tightened. Rates rose. Trust thinned. Each delay made the next loan more expensive, the next promise harder to keep. Soldiers felt the consequences before anyone else. Pay was delayed, then reduced, then withheld entirely. Commanders improvised, promises replaced wages, loyalty frayed, hunger sharpened tempers. A financial decision made in a quiet room echoed across battlefields in blood and fire. Civilians felt it next. Taxes increased to service debts they would never see. Market fees rose, rents climbed. Entire towns labored to feed a system that no longer fed them back. The silver passed through their lives without stopping, on its way to creditors far away. The king aged under the burden of obligations that multiplied faster than victories. Each solution demanded another signature. Each signature narrowed the future. He ruled an empire funded by expectations, sustained by trust that thinned with every passing year. The loans became a cycle. Borrow to fight, fight to justify borrowing, win battles that created new costs, lose nothing decisively, yet never gain enough to escape. The future was permanently mortgaged, parceled out shipment by shipment. In the end, the most powerful empire on earth waited anxiously for ships on the horizon, knowing that every sail carried not relief, but another reminder that tomorrow had already been spent. The waiting began quietly. A day past the expected payday, then another. Soldiers counted time by hunger, not calendars. At first they joked about it. Delays were common. The silver would arrive. It always did, or so they had been told. Camps settled into unease. Fires burned lower to save fuel. Rations were stretched thinner. Men checked their purses more often, as if coins might appear through faith alone. Officers avoided eye contact. They had no answers, only orders to wait. Weeks passed. Boots wore through. Cloaks were sold. A helmet traded for bread. Armor for wine. Survival demanded sacrifice long before battle ever did. These men had not enlisted for glory alone. They had families, debts, homes that depended on wages promised in the king's name. In foreign lands, the hostility was constant. Locals watched from behind shutters. Markets charged soldiers more. Trust eroded on both sides. Hunger sharpened tempers. A shove became a fight. A fight became blood. Discipline, once enforced by pride, now relied on threats no one believed in anymore. Letters were written home, then rewritten, then never sent. What could be said? That the empire was rich, but their children would starve? That they guarded cities overflowing with silver they would never touch? Silence felt easier. Commanders begged upward. Couriers rode fast, carrying reports no one wanted to read. Pay arrears, desertions, growing unrest. The replies came slow, wrapped in formality. Patience was requested, loyalty praised, promises repeated. None of it filled stomachs. In the ranks, rumors spread faster than truth. The silver fleet had sunk. The bankers had taken everything. The king had forgotten them. Each version was worse than the last. Certainty disappeared. Fear replaced it. Then restraint snapped. A group of men refused orders, not out of treason, out of exhaustion. They demanded pay. When it did not come, they took what they needed from the nearest town. Food first, then money, then anything that could be traded. Violence followed not as strategy but consequence. Civilians suffered silently. Doors splintered. Homes were stripped bare. These were not enemies. These were soldiers who had once sworn to protect them. Mothers hid children. Priests prayed louder. The line between protector and threat dissolved in the dark. The mutinies spread like fire carried by wind. One unpaid army learned from another. Authority weakened. Fear replaced command. Officers who resisted were ignored. Those who sympathized were powerless. The empire's will fractured from within. At night, soldiers lay awake listening to the sounds of a city they had broken. Guilt mixed with hunger. Shame tangled with anger. They had not crossed oceans for this. They had not survived battles to become thieves. But hunger leaves little room for honor. Some deserted, melted into the countryside, became ghosts. Others stayed, trapped by circumstance, waiting for wages that now felt mythical. The war continued around them, but their fight had narrowed to survival. Back home, the cost was invisible, but immense. Families received no pay, no word, only absence. Fields went untended. Children grew without fathers. Wives learned to bargain harder, to endure longer, to expect less. The crown saw the mutinies as disorder, as embarrassment, as a threat to reputation. But beneath the reports was a simpler truth. An army without pay is an army without loyalty. An empire that cannot pay its soldiers must rely on fear, and fear does not march well. Silver still moved through the world. It passed from mine to ship, from ship to banker, from banker to ledger. It simply did not stop where it was needed most. Not in the hands that held the line. Not in the camps where loyalty was starving, and as unpaid soldiers waited beneath foreign skies, weapons beside them, anger growing heavier than armor, the Empire's greatest weakness stood exposed, not on the battlefield, but in the empty space where trust should have been. The ships were meant to inspire fear before they ever fired a shot. Massive hulls, towering masts, flags snapping against the wind like declarations of destiny. From the docks, the Armada looked unstoppable, a floating empire assembled in haste, financed by desperation, burdened by expectations it could not carry. Men boarded with quiet faces, sailors, soldiers, priests. Some crossed themselves before stepping onto the planks. Others kissed tokens pressed into their hands by wives who did not know if they would ever see them again. The pay was uncertain. The mission was not. Failure was unthinkable. Success was mandatory. Below deck, the reality was less glorious. Supplies were mismatched, food already spoiling, powder damp from hurried storage, ships designed for different purposes forced into formation. The Armada was not a single weapon. It was a collection of compromises, stitched together by urgency and faith. Behind it all, money, or rather the lack of it. The fleet was built on credit. Loans stacked upon loans. Timber bought with borrowed silver. Crews recruited with promises instead of coin. Every delay increased the cost. Every repair added another obligation. The fleet sailed heavy not just with men and cannon, but with debt. Commanders argued quietly. Routes debated. Weather underestimated. Time pressed from all sides. The king demanded action. The bankers demanded reassurance. The sea offered neither. When the Armada finally moved, it did so like a procession. Impressive, slow, vulnerable. The ocean does not respect symbolism. Wind shifted, waves rose, formations broke, communication failed, orders arrived too late to matter. Storms struck without warning, ships scattered, anchors tore loose, hulls cracked against unseen rocks, men prayed aloud as decks tilted and water poured in. Cannon meant for battle became dead weight, dragging vessels toward the deep. No enemy needed to attack, nature collected the debt first. In the chaos, discipline unraveled. Sailors fought to save ships never meant to survive such punishment. Others abandoned hope entirely. Supplies were jettisoned. Horses screamed as they were thrown overboard to lighten sinking decks. Lives were reduced to calculations made in seconds. When remnants of the fleet limped home, the silence was worse than defeat. No triumphant bells, no cheering crowds, just damaged ships and exhausted men stepping onto familiar ground with hollow eyes. They carried stories no one wanted to hear. The cost was staggering, not only in lives lost, but in silver vanished. Ships destroyed represented years of labor, forests cut, wages promised. The loans that built the Armada did not sink with it. They waited patiently, ink dry, interest accruing. Back in the palace, the numbers were rewritten. Losses reframed, blame redirected. Another loan arranged. The war effort could not stop. To stop was to admit weakness. To continue required even more money, on even worse terms. Families learned of the disaster slowly. A name missing from a list, a rumor from a port, a knock that never came. Widows joined a growing silent crowd. Orphans learned the cost of ambition before they understood its purpose. For the common people, the Armada's failure meant higher taxes, more rationing, fewer opportunities. A war that promised resolution now demanded further sacrifice. The silver needed to rebuild would be taken from lives already stretched thin. The fleet had been designed to end uncertainty. Instead, it multiplied it. Confidence shattered. Credit tightened. Allies reconsidered. Enemies watched closely. What the Armada revealed was not just a military weakness, but a financial one. An empire willing to gamble everything on a single throw because it could not afford to wait. A state so indebted that speed replaced preparation, faith replaced planning. The sea kept its wrecks. The bankers kept their contracts. And Spain was left with the weight of a disaster that echoed far beyond broken ships, deep into the ledgers, the markets, and the lives of those who would never see the ocean, but would spend years paying for what it had swallowed. The first default was treated as an emergency, a temporary failure. An unfortunate pause in payments blamed on timing, storms, delays beyond control. Officials spoke carefully. Bankers frowned but waited. The crown promised resolution. silver would come. It always did. When payments stopped, life did not. Soldiers still marched. Ships still sailed. Wars did not pause for accounting. The machinery of empire moved forward, even as its financial heart skipped a beat. Silence filled the space where confidence once lived. Credit tightened, but it did not vanish. Too much depended on Spain continuing. The empire was too large to fail cleanly. Bankers returned to the table, adjusting terms, demanding higher interest, stronger guarantees, priority access to treasure. The king signed again. Relief followed. Briefly. Then it happened again. Another suspension, another explanation, another promise. The language shifted. What was once exceptional became procedural. Default was no longer a shock. It was a rhythm. Each time the cost grew. Trust thinned, interest climbed, the future shrank. The crown paid yesterday's debts with tomorrow's silver, and tomorrow's debts with promises made to men who knew exactly how desperate the situation had become. In cities, the effects were subtle at first. Merchants felt credit lines shorten. Suppliers demanded payment up front. Prices crept higher. Uncertainty settled in like fog. People learned to read between announcements. When the crown spoke of confidence, they prepared for scarcity. The third and fourth defaults stripped away illusion. Soldiers no longer expected to be paid on time. Delays were assumed. Mutinies became less shocking, more inevitable. Commanders planned around unpaid months as if it were weather. Civilians learned to brace for impact. Behind palace walls, the numbers grew abstract, so large they lost meaning. Officials stopped asking how to fix the system and focused instead on keeping it moving. The question was no longer how to avoid default, but how to survive the next one. Each default rearranged priorities. Bankers secured better positions. Ordinary people absorbed the losses. Taxes rose. Services declined. The burden shifted downward, silently. An empire financed itself by exhausting its own foundation. By the fifth and sixth suspensions, Spain's reputation had changed. Still powerful, still feared, but no longer trusted. Credit was extended cautiously, priced with suspicion. The crown paid more for less. Trapped in a spiral, it could not exit without dismantling the wars that defined its identity. Families felt it in ways no proclamation could hide. Work disappeared. Food grew expensive. Savings evaporated. The promise of imperial glory rang hollow against empty tables. People adapted by lowering expectations, by enduring quietly. The defaults blurred together. Years marked not by peace or victory, but by financial reset. Each one framed as necessary. Each one weakening the structure a little more, like cracks spreading through stone under immense weight. By the time the ninth default arrived, there was no drama left, no shock. Just confirmation of what everyone already knew. The empire had built a system that required failure to function. Collapse was not an accident, it was maintenance. The king ruled over territories stretching beyond the horizon, yet could not escape the math written into his own policies. Every solution relied on the same tools. More borrowing, more silver, more faith in a future already promised away. What remained was momentum, habit, the inability to stop without unraveling everything at once. Spain continued not because it was strong, but because it was too entangled to fall cleanly. 9 times the crown admitted it could not pay. 9 times the world adjusted and carried on. And with each suspension, the cost moved further from the palace and deeper into the lives of those who had never seen a silver mine, never signed a contract, and never had a say in a cycle that had quietly become permanent. The silver arrived in ports with great fanfare. Bells rang, crowds gathered, chests were opened, coins clattered onto counting tables, and yet everywhere the eye looked, production had stopped. Workshops were empty, forges cold, fields unworked. Spain had learned to trade silver for goods instead of making them. In towns, artisans glanced at the markets and shook their heads. Why labor for hours when the same cloth, the same tools, the same wine could be bought for coins that had just arrived from the mines? Why build when money could buy? The answer seemed obvious, but its consequences were invisible at first. Slowly, the rhythm of creation faltered. Habits died, skills faded. Generations grew accustomed to trading effort for silver rather than effort for craft. The countryside felt the strain differently. Farmers had long tilled the land, expecting to trade crops for stability. Now taxes and levies demanded more silver than ever before. Wheat was carried to ports, exported, and sold to pay for wars fought on distant soil. Families survived, but barely. Every coin that left the farm represented a risk taken, a future compromised. Hunger did not strike immediately. It arrived quietly, in thin loaves and empty granaries, in children's eyes that were wide but tired. In cities, workshops that once rang with hammers fell silent, blacksmiths stared at blank anvils, carpenters rubbed calloused hands and considered the ease of importing finished goods instead. Trades that had built the empire slowly disappeared. The silver was abundant, but industry was not. Money passed through hands like water through fingers. It promised power, but it could not sustain the world it had entered. Officials in Seville and Madrid monitored ledgers with pride. The empire had wealth beyond imagination. Every fleet that arrived with treasure was counted, measured, and logged. And yet no one noticed the subtle erosion. Skill, labor, craft, and initiative could not be written into books. They could not be counted. They could not be borrowed against or promised for tomorrow. They could only be used or lost. Merchants abroad noticed the balance of trade shifted. Spain imported more than it produced. Goods flowed in faster than they flowed out. Foreign markets grew richer, while Spanish workshops declined. The silver that filled treasure chests left behind emptiness. The empire could buy what it needed, but it could not sustain what it already had. Families felt it in daily life. Craftsmen who once trained sons in their trade now encouraged them to seek easier fortunes in commerce. Children learned the art of spending before the art of making. Pride became secondary to convenience. Tradition gave way to expedience. The society that had built an empire on craft and conquest was slowly unlearning how to make anything at all. Even the armies felt the shift. Equipment was purchased instead of forged. Armor arrived complete from distant ports. Muskets replaced swords crafted at home. The convenience of silver created dependence. Every battle relied on imported tools, purchased with wealth that was not earned but extracted. The line between survival and vulnerability thinned. Across the empire, a quiet tension grew. Money was everywhere, but production had slowed to a crawl. Skills that had once been the backbone of Spain were now scarce. The more silver arrived, the less the empire produced. The abundance that should have ensured power now threatened it. The king counted treasure. He saw mountains of coins. He imagined strength, but the true measure of an empire, the ability to create, to sustain, to endure, was slipping quietly beneath the surface, unnoticed, until it would no longer be recoverable. In every silent workshop, in every empty forge, in every untended field, the empire paid a price that silver alone could never cover. Production, not money, had always been the source of wealth. Yet Spain had forgotten that lesson in the shimmer of its silver. The empire stretched across oceans, continents, and islands. Flags flew where the sun rose and where it set. Soldiers marched on distant shores. Silver flowed in endless rivers. And yet the king sat alone, surrounded by wealth that could not defend him. He counted coins. He calculated debts. He measured a power that had no weight. Abundance had created illusions. The mountains of silver made him feel invincible. The fleets of ships, the forts, the armies, all symbols of supremacy. Yet the true strength of a nation lies not in treasure, but in people, in labor, in skill, in trust. Spain had gold and silver beyond measure, but it had begun to forget the work that had made it powerful in the first place. In towns and villages, the consequences were quiet, yet undeniable. Bakers measured bread in smaller loaves. Shoemakers stretched leather thinner. Fields were tilled more by desperation than by hope. Children learned early the weight of scarcity despite the clatter of coins in distant counting houses. Every step of production had been replaced by the passage of money, and yet money alone could not grow the soil, forge the tools, or teach the trade. The soldiers felt it most keenly. They carried swords and muskets, fought under banners of silver and gold, yet every battle demanded payment they might never receive. Unpaid troops mutinied. Hunger sharpened swords before enemy steel ever did. Loyalty became fragile, conditional, earned by food and coin, not by honor or pride. The empire's wealth could buy obedience for a time, but it could not buy faith, not truly, not forever. Behind palace walls, the king faced impossible choices: more war or more borrowing. Pay one army, neglect another. Invest in fortresses or repair ships. Each decision carried weight measured not in victory or defeat, but in lives that would suffer quietly. Families, civilians, laborers, soldiers, they bore the burden of calculations made in gilded chambers far from their reality. Silver was counted, contracts were written, loans piled upon loans, and yet the problem was never lack of wealth, it was reliance on it. The empire built itself on treasure, believing abundance was strength, but wealth without production is a house on sand. Every ship that arrived, every chest opened, reminded the crown of the illusion. Power is not coins. Power is what coins can sustain. In distant mines, men labored beneath unforgiving rock. Dust choked lungs, hands cracked, bodies gave way. Their labor birthed silver that would vanish through the hands of bankers, armies, and kings. They mined not for themselves, not for their families, but for an empire that mistook the metal for its own soul. The market spoke truth the king could not see. Foreign merchants grew rich as Spanish workshops grew quiet. Imports replaced industry. Skills faded. Trade balances favored outsiders. The more silver Spain held, the less it produced. The empire's wealth moved in circles, creating illusion while eroding reality. Civilians paid in silence. Taxes rose. Rations fell. The common people carried a cost, invisible in counting houses and treasure fleets. Hunger, labor, and lost opportunity became the real currency of the empire. While kings and bankers tallied numbers, the people sustained the empire's existence at their own expense. And everywhere the lesson was written in small, relentless ways. Silver can buy ships, soldiers, and time, but it cannot create a workforce, instill skill, or build resilience. The richest man in history, the king who owned the silver of mountains and the gold of empires, discovered that abundance is not power. Power belongs to those who produce, endure, and build, even when the treasure flows ceaselessly through their hands. In the quiet hours, when candles burned low and the counting tables were empty, the empire could feel it, its strength measured not in coins but in what those coins had failed to sustain. Wealth was present, production was not, trust was fragile, and the future depended on lessons learned too late in silence and in the slow erosion of everything money alone could never secure.